Hel- Hello and welcome to Down South Anomalies. My name is Jamie Leonardo and I'm go under the moniker of J Katz and of course my beautiful wife Aspasia.
Hi.
And welcome to this opening episode. We're on a curve here, an exponential
We're
curve of
learning.
technological learning.
Yeah.
So please excuse that salmon pink look we've got. We've got to reset our white balance at one stage there. Anyway, we are looking into everything in the Southern Hemisphere that is anomalous, which is massive.
It is so huge. But we'll start at the beginning and work our way through.
Well, we should start at the beginning. Now, you and I have been together 32 years. As a matter of fact, it is your birthday today. So happy
I don't know
birthday
how
to
that
you,
happened.
Aspasia.
We didn't do that on purpose, but here we are.
And 32 years ago, we met as diversional therapists working with heavily disabled people and some mentally ill and brain damaged individuals, which bonded us emotionally as a couple. And then we realized we both had an interest in the world of the anomalous. And we started to go to research meetings. I should tell people that we're actually coming live from Sydney, and we should acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, which is our Indigenous culture, a profound culture in which, historically, as we go along, archaeology is telling us now is dating back tens of thousands of years and may even be in contention for the original, cradle of civilization.
Yeah. So there's evidence for that. So we might even check that out.
Well, we should look at that incredible family of the Strongs that have been doing remarkable research into the Indigenous. But anyway, let's start at the beginning. What kicked off your interest in the world of anomalies, Aspasia?
Oh God,
Do you think it'd date back to your father?
Oh,
in
absolutely,
Greece?
in family, because we were Greek and dad, dad was always about, the evil eye and other realms and things like that. So I grew up with that, not a possibility, but a reality. So I never questioned anything that was anomalous. I just thought, yep, I'll look into that and see what evidence there is for it.
Now, even though you were born in Belgium, your family heralds from the island of Lesbos.
In Greece, yes.
And your father recounted an incident to you very early in the piece. Can you maybe articulate that?
Well, he taught when he was on the island. He would have been late teens. He was out in the mountains, and I think he was tending the sheep, and he heard this really bizarre sound. So this would have been in the 40s, sort of the late 40s, maybe early 50s as well. So somewhere at that time. And he heard this really bizarre sound that he'd never ever heard before, because it was this sort of a machine thing, because they didn't have machines back then on the island. But he heard this whooshing sound just over a hill, and he went to look and saw that, like, this all the grass just swaying, like there'd been this a really strong force, a gust of wind and stuff. And he looked around and he heard like a whooshing sound. So he doesn't know what it was, but he definitely thinks there was something there at the time.
Right. And so were there any incidents in your early life yourself that you can recall?
No, not really. Not that I can recall, but I've always been open to looking into stuff. And I love that there's mysteries to life. It's not all explained to me. It's all black and white, and that's all there is to it.
Well, I've always believed there was a cracking consensus reality. And around the same time of an extraordinary case in Australia, which has become known as Westall 66, it was 1966.
Mm-hmm.
And if you pop up onto YouTube, you'll actually be able to catch that extraordinary documentary, which is remarkably done, is about a case involving literally hundreds of eyewitnesses that occurred at a school. Well, I had the same similar incident occur at my primary school, And I would have been no older than 9 years of age. I've only ever found one other eyewitness to that, and that we're looking at now one of the news reports about the Westall incident at the time.
Mhm.
And we had an object that was hovering adjacent to the schoolyard, Aspasia.
Mhm. Yeah.
It was probably about 100 meters off the ground. It was spherical, but we were told later on by the teachers that what we were looking at was a stationary weather balloon hovering over that football field, a weather balloon with portholes. So that sort of kicked me off into a fascination with the subject, and I started to write to researchers in my early teenage years around the world. And I think the one thing that sort of astounded me was that there were so many scientists and people from within government that were actually looking into the phenomena and believed that there was something genuine to it. So I think in many ways that consumed my interest.
Mhm.
Of course, when I came to my late teens.
But did you, at the time of your school sighting, did you get authorities come down like, police or people from the Air Force or anyone like that to speak to you like they did in Westall?
No, all I can remember is basically the science teachers sort of ridiculing us. But we did watch this for at least 50 minutes, and then we had to go back in after lunchtime, and it was still there. And when we came out in the afternoon, it wasn't. But something was occurring. But at Westall, they even had some of the young children were literally verbal by our federal police in this country.
Right.
And some of those were extremely courageous, especially for their age, but they had objects land. They had individuals touch the objects that were hovering off the ground. I think one object landed. I think one was hovering off the ground. Anyway, it is a really worthy documentary that took a female documentarian, I think, nearly 7 or 8 years to put
get it
together.
up. Yes.
So congratulations to her. Congratulations to Shane, who narrates the documentary. He's an
Shane Ryan. Yes.
incredible researcher,
Mhm.
and it is a fascinating case. And I believe at the same time, James McDonald was out here, the astrophysicist, working with the CSIRO, initially looking at, problems with our ionosphere, which was probably, I'd say, the whole notion of the ozone and what was the preliminary to that occurring. And he actually went to Westall himself, which caused a large controversy. But I believe if you actually punch into the net, you'll find the James McDonald archives, and you'll be able to look at some of the information provided at that time about Westall. Now, we will endeavour to get as many researchers from the Southern Hemisphere to go live with us on this stream and this podcast. And we have to thank Doug and Alex for their extraordinary opportunity.
Yes.
For both of us. I really appreciate the fact that we are now part of the Untold radio network. Now, very early in the piece in Australia, we had some incredible people in the media that were fascinated with that subject.
Mhm.
And one of them was a Channel 7 journalist. Now, Channel 7
yes.
is an independent TV
Television.
station
Yep.
in Australia, a free-to-air station that still exists. And they are probably the maverick for UFO documentaries. But this journalist was called Roger Clemson. And we've also had a great involvement in the film world. I was one of the hosts on SBS television down here for the movie show. And so you and I have always been very enthusiastic in finding real films. And when we
Yes, we
say
have.
real films, we mean 16 millimeter,
16.
35
On a reel.
millimeter.
Yeah.
Yes, on a reel.
Yeah.
And one of the films that we stumbled onto that I think has been lost to history
Mhm.
is an original copy from 1972 of Roger Clemson's UFO documentary. No, I think I might have had a picture of Roger there.
UFOs, fact or fiction?
Oh, there it is. Here's
there
a
we
little
go.
couple of frame grabs from that documentary. And in the future, we will actually probably bring you excerpts from that documentary during.
It's an amazing documentary.
It's
Isn't it?
astounding
Yeah.
with a lot of local cases, a lot of researchers at the time. And it also is very non-skeptical, which was quite surprising for material around that time. And I guess all of us that have been involved in the research of anomalies, cryptozoology, ufology, have always been well aware of the ridicule factor out there,
Oh, yes, that ridicule factor.
which could be very destructive.
It can, because it stops people from actually coming out and discussing these things that they've witnessed. And then they have to actually hide it, which then becomes a problem for them.
Yes, and because of our background, primarily working in the field with individuals that are sort of marginalized due to their mental aberrations or their physical inabilities, we've always had a very strong motivation to make sure that people are able to integrate these experiences into their everyday life. And, I think our basic motivation is to remove the ridicule around that topic,
definitely,
and bring as much science to bear on it that we can. So, look, I think, let's go back to Post magazine. I mean, this is where most Australians would actually read stories
Back
about
in the
anomalies
day, yeah.
in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And as you can see there, the ridicule factor is very large, as well as numerous other things. But they would have a section at the back of these magazines. Pics and Post people were exploitative magazines in many ways, but they would have a section at the back which was about roadhouses in Australia. And roadhouses are basically like your service station, your sleepover point on the vast continent that we have here.
Well, they're like your diners.
Yeah.
You stop and
and so many incidents occurred in the Australian outback that, these stories would be documented in publications like this. And I think this is sort of, well before we started to get reputable researchers like Bill Chalker and Moira McGee stepping into the stream of things that had credentials. So
did we ever end up in Post, or?
I think we ended up in a Pics people.
Pics, was it? Okay, that was another magazine like Post.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you can just roll down there, you'll just trigger my memory on some of the images. Maybe go back up.
Yeah.
You're in the midst of the Untold Radio Network, listening to Down South Anomalies. So that led me to a program I did in the 90s for the ABC that rated through the roof, so much so that it ended up going into the stores, the ABC stores. On cassette.
On audio
we
cassette.
have digitized that. And if you punch in to Catch a Flying Star, UFO Experiences by Jamie Leonardo, you'll actually find that
on YouTube.
up
you can
online.
Listen to it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's still digitally there under UFO Research New South Wales.
It is.
And that was a program where I actually travelled the air highway into the Nullarbor and stayed at the Mundrabilla Roadhouse. I think I was one of the very few individuals with my research team to stay there for over one night. It doesn't usually happen. And the reason why I went there is there was an extraordinary case in the late 80s that gained international
1988,
attention.
yes, the
Knowles family. So it was a mother and three sons driving the air highway very early in the morning when an object landed directly in front of them.
In front of them or on top of them?
No, it landed initially in front of them.
Okay,
it was like a huge pulsating egg yolk.
Egg yolk, yes.
And it did eventually land on top of the car and evidently raise that car up off the ground. Thank you so much, Tim. It's great to hear from you.
There's people listening.
There are people listening, and we're really surprised at that. And it is the beginning, believe me.
We shouldn't be. But
we're gonna work up to an incredible level.
Back to the Knowles family.
So it raised that car up off the ground, dumped it back down onto the Nullarbor, and then started searching for them with a beam of light, evidently, which freaked the family out completely. They ran and hid till it actually disappeared. Now, that case was virtually within 24 hours, debunked in the media. It received worldwide attention. But the odd thing was that federal police were appearing on the scene very quickly.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, why, excuse me, why would the federal police get involved in a case that they thought was just a nonsense?
Yeah. They actually drove to the Mundrabilla Roadhouse. The incident occurred outside the Mundrabilla homestead, which was a vast acre, nearly 1 million acres. And I spent time with the owners of the Mundrabilla homestead. And the remarkable thing, bless you on your birthday, the remarkable thing is that they'd had incidents themselves northwest
We
there.
had somebody from New Mexico just before.
I love
I'm
that.
loving it.
And Mexico is so beautiful, so outstanding.
New
We have to
Mexico.
get there at some stage.
Yeah, we do.
And that's where Linda Moulton Howe lives, I think.
In New
Anyway, I'm
Mexico?
digressing.
Yeah, you are.
But look up the Knowles case. It is a fascinating case. It received worldwide attention. In the project to catch a flying star, we actually go right back to the early moments of the colony of Australia,
Yes,
which
we
has
do.
got a very modern history.
Mm-hmm.
I think Cook was here in the 1770s.
1777. He came.
Yes,
Yep.
and so around the I think it was the mid to the late 1800s,
Yes.
the surveyor in Parramatta, which is like a sister city to Sydney, isn't
Well,
it?
it's
Could you call it that?
Well, it's now that it's become part of Sydney because Sydney's so huge now. But it was a city, and it was out west, and it was quite a trip to get there. Now it takes you like 30 minutes to get there, but before it was like an hour or so.
No, I think Bill Chalker, if my memory serves me correctly, he was the first person to actually cite
That's right.
that the surveyor for the council there had been given the plans, the mathematical plans for council chamber
Yes.
by an entity that actually a close encounter he had in the park itself.
Yeah, so the plans were given to them by the aliens.
Wow. And you know what? There is such a rich history of mysteries and anomalies, especially in Australia, certainly in New Zealand, so much in South America, and so much in the islands around.
Yes.
I mean, one of the things you could talk about is you've got a bit of an obsession for the cruise ship.
I do.
One of those islands we went to, we actually met an investigator that was looking into structures that were found on that island. Can
Some
you
really
tell people
bizarre
about that
structures. Now,
island?
what was that island? Was it Isle of Pines?
Yes,
The Isle of Pines in Vanuatu, Numia. They found these really bizarre structures there. Some sort of a cement thing happening.
Way before cement.
Way before. Yes, way before cement.
And people have postulated that they might have been like some sort of lift-off landing site.
Yeah, so people have been trying to go there and investigate that. So we'll get on to that researcher and definitely have him on the show to talk about that, because I've been to that island a couple of times on the cruise ships, but of course that doesn't give me a chance to actually go out into where these mounds are. So
Yes,
we need to get onto that one and do a bit more of an investigation on that. But you know how you're speaking about Bill Chalker and Parramatta. Bill Chalker is one of Australia's leading UFO researchers, and he's actually done quite a lot of stuff. He was the one for the Oz Files.
That's right. And now Bill is an industrial chemist by trade. And Bill was one of the only researchers, if not the only researcher, that was given access to the RAAF files in this country to disseminate to other researchers. And of course, if people are aware of some of the UFO encounters in Australia, one of the major ones was over Bass Strait in 1978 that again received international attention.
Yeah.
And that was the Frederick Valentich case, in which he was flying was it like a Fokker?
A Cessna?
Yes, a Cessna, that's right. You are so much more aware of this than I am. And that case to this day still remains unsolved. This, as you can see there from the news headline, I think that's from the Australian, there was a large metallic sound. There was an incredible amount of recording of Frederick actually stating that he was looking at an anomalous object.
Yes, definitely.
And it was surrounding the ship and his plane. It was circling it. And then it started to scrape up against it just before they lost radio contact.
And is but that bit has been actually confiscated by the
You know what? We need to discuss that with Bill.
Yes.
And we'll also be discussing an astounding case with Bill, which will really centre on, which we feel needs more light. James Fox actually recently did a little investigation in his documentary Phenomena, but that's a case out of the 50s in Papua New Guinea.
Oh, right, yes, the Father Gill case.
That involved a minister.
Yes.
That's an extraordinary case. I think, both those incidents well worth discussing with Bill about the reality of them. So that Papua New Guinea case involved, again, like the Westall case, involved literally 10,
There was
20,
quite a few
30
people
individuals, the congregation of the church, and went on like the
over
incident.
a few nights, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It wasn't just one night.
And they
Yeah.
also had some form of like really close encounters where they were actually literally waving at the individuals on board the craft. It was
Yes.
like a mezzanine level, and these people were standing there staring
Yeah.
at them and waving at them. And that's an astounding thing for a minister of the cloth to
That was in late 50s, was
late
it?
50s, I think 1958,
Yes.
to actually go on the record to state that he'd had this experience
encounter.
with his congregation. And, you know, we're lucky today in Australia. We have what has become termed the latest Eric von Daniken, which is the astounding Paul Wallace,
Yes.
who was a deacon in the Anglican
yes,
Church
yes.
and has written 3 astounding books: The Scars of Eden, Return to Eden,
And Escape from Eden.
That's right.
I think that was the first one, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Escape from Eden.
So we'll be getting Paul on to have a chat with him as well.
Yeah.
And Paul's research is astounding and does show you that it's a matter of perception when it comes to actually, you know, the way things are pitched at us. But what is in the human philosophy that drags us into this notion of religiosity. But let's step back here. There were some few interesting things in my teenage year that really pricked my consciousness.
Yes.
And one of them was this book, Aspasia.
The Cosmic Conspiracy.
And it came from a gentleman called Stan Deo, who migrated to Australia in the mid-70s.
He did.
And said,
From the
States, told us all that he was an informant for the FBI.
And he wasn't.
Well, who knows? I don't know if he was or he wasn't. Don't say anything.
If you're an informant, you don't tell people you're an informant. But anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, he said that he had been trained at NORAD. And he had been subliminally trained, and he was aware of governments working on anti-gravitic propulsion. And Australia was one of the places that this was occurring. Now, that book was massive in its day.
Yes, it was.
And I think he went on to do a documentary and he even interviewed William Moore and Stanton Freeman very early in the piece, based around his theory, which has become a very big staple of sort of the fringes of ufology.
Or the more exploitative
maybe.
Yeah, well.
He went on to actually write this second book.
Yeah.
Let's just pop that up now.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah.
The Vindicator.
The Vindicator Scroll.
Both books are a fascinating, exciting read. And, you know, all of a sudden, Stan Deo disappeared from Australian shores, went back to the States just prior to the 9/11 event, I think.
Right, okay.
But don't, you know, allegedly prior to that.
We don't know if he had anything to do with it.
No, of course he didn't. But look, very fascinating. I think initially he was working in conjunction with the Pentecostal Church in terms of doing those lectures. Now, all of this is allegedly, but that book is fascinating.
It is
and
a
I'm
fascinating
sure
read.
the documentary Cosmic Conspiracy is out there. If people have trouble finding that, well, we live in a warehouse, a gigantic warehouse that is full to the brim with videos, with films. And so we will always be able to send you a copy
in the right direction.
or point you in the right direction for that.
Yeah.
The other stuff is cryptozoology. We are a window of high strangeness.
Oh, we are. Absolutely.
Especially in the Southern Hemisphere, especially in all those South Sea islands. But let's have a look at what's happening in Australia. And one of the greatest researchers contemporaneously at the moment is Dean Harrelson. Let's have a peek at YowieHunters.com. Now, YowieHunters.com is one of the most profound and astounding sites I've ever come across. And Dean is meticulous in his research. And it is, you go up on YouTube and just listen to these. They will give you great visual displays. They've actually started to animate them.
Wow.
They are all independent eyewitness accounts. They will give you the topographical map and the location. And it is just literally getting into the hundreds. And I think Dean has been around for at least the last couple of decades. And we're hoping to interview Dean for this program as well. And that is like a piece of gold, YowieHunters.com.
It is,
now, if you're unsure of the word Yowie, it is a bit of a slang, often indigenous term for what our Bigfoot,
Yes.
hairy
The
man,
hairy man,
Sasquatch.
Sasquatch, yeah, is called here in Australia.
Now, maybe what we should do is have a little look at Rex Gilroy here. Now, if we're
Yeah.
going to go to the grandfather of cryptozoology in Australia and New Zealand, it would happen to be the astounding Rex Gilroy, who allegedly, I believe at this stage, is not in the best of health, but Rex's wife and Rex himself were really laid the groundwork for looking into anomalous structures, everything from ufology. But Rex really made his name with Yowie research early in the piece. And Rex has a lot of independent literature out there, so it's probably good. This is a great book to start with, I think.
Yeah.
Great encapsulation of things.
Okay.
Now, look, speaking, we're still on that subject of Bill Chalker. Let's go to one of the most profound cases in the world.
This is a really amazing case.
This has DNA supporting evidence for basically an alien interaction.
Yeah.
And this involved an individual, Peter Curry, who we set up probably the first support group with.
Yep, in Australia.
Yeah, and now what time would have that been, in the late 90s?
No, it was early 90s.
Early 90s, right, 90s. Okay.
Yeah.
Called Euforsa.
Euforsa. It's about 92, 93.
Okay, so I'm not going to go into the evidence. We'll get Bill to talk about that and talk about that DNA analysis.
Because he did, but
we
at the time, we were involved with Peter and his wife Vivian. And, you know, the incident happened. And when the incident happened, he rang us and we will discuss all the ins and outs of what happened and how we went about trying to maintain the integrity of the sample, the hair that was then sent off for DNA analysis to the States.
Peter appears in episodes of Ancient Aliens and things like that. But that is a case distinctly, even though Peter is Lebanese in background, and he was having experiences in Lebanon before they migrated to Australia.
That's right.
He had bold experience. He also has incredible physical evidence on his body with massive scoop
marks and stuff. Yeah.
So you know, we speak about, you know, DNA evidence when it comes to Sasquatch, Bigfoot, and Yowie, but were you aware that there is incredibly acute DNA evidence that has been found in Australia, Sydney, Australia, involving that case and the book Hair of the Alien? So maybe let's step back to some early literature that people who want to read about Australia might have a little search for. This is one of the first books I ever came across when I was quite young, by James Holich, is it? Have I got that, pronounced that right? And, you know, it basically encapsulates many cases early in the piece. Now, if we actually go to the Hervey books here.
Yes.
Those two copies, the hard copy and the soft copy, the paperback copy of UFOs over the Southern Hemisphere, were very early pieces of literature. But the one that really...
When were they done?
They were done 60s? In the 60s.
Yeah.
One of the most important books I can remember reading is Richard Tamling's book on UFOs, which I hope I've got here. That? Might be right up the top.
Tell me the book.
Yeah.
Tell me the book.
I think it's just called UFO Flying. Hold on. Let's just have a little peek.
Flying Saucers over Australia? No.
No. We mightn't have a copy of it here. Okay, let's go to Keith's book. Keith Basterfield's another very well-known researcher historically. He's written many books. This one took into notion the hypnagogic
experience,
which I think really, in colloquial terms, that's what people term as the death hag experience, when you actually you feel pressure on top of you. It's that state between actually falling into REM sleep or deep sleep and just prior to sort of being consciously aware. A lot of people have a sense of paralysis in that state, and I think Keith there was trying to say, are we dealing with, you know, a really physical experience, or is this something deep within inside human consciousness? And at the end of the day, I think we are dealing with a physical experience, just the evidence.
Well, the evidence is going that way instead of...
Now, there has always been an incredible relationship with water in Australia.
Oh, yeah.
And I found that when I was in the Nullarbor, because there were numerous stories, especially in Broken Hill, about the the dam area
Mhm.
and objects coming in and out of the dam, and the activity
Draining them, and water tanks.
and water tanks. And
Draining
the
water
Mudravilla
tanks.
homestead
Absolutely.
actually had
Out in
their,
the desert.
their water tank drained. And
Yeah.
you know what? They didn't give a damn. The property owners were, I don't care what you've seen, I don't care what you've experienced, we need to get water back in that
That's
tank.
right, exactly.
Because, and you know, the other thing that is extraordinary about Australians living in the outback is the fact that they are tenacious, courageous people. They know their
Practical
land,
people.
they know their star field.
Exactly.
And when something odd occurs, you can bet your bottom dollar it is extremely odd. So, yeah, fascinating. Well, let's pop that book up a bit more about the Gosford Falls,
Yeah.
because Moira, we know
All right,
very
Moira
well,
McGee, yes.
and Brian Dickinson,
Mhm.
they started UFO Research New South Wales in the early 90s.
Yes, yes.
And there was a bit of contention about the title of that, but UFO research still goes on today.
Mhm. Brian Dickinson's parents were UFO researchers in New Zealand.
Yes,
So he's
and they even toured.
pedigree.
They toured the notorious
Oh, yes.
contactee of Damsky out there.
Adamski,
Yeah.
George Adamski. So
Yeah.
long lineage of delving into that.
Yes, and you know, Brian's out there, not the best of health,
Well,
but
he's-
still
yeah.
kicking on, and Moira's still writing. I think Moira's up to her 12th book.
She's written so much. She's an amazing UFO researcher.
And she's had a background in rescue and didn't she have an extraordinary background in the field of rescue?
Was it SAS? No, not the SAS. What am I saying?
Oh, I think it's to do with flood damaged areas, places
yes,
like that.
Yeah.
So she is a very practical minded person. And she and Brian actually pioneered extensive research in the 90s
Mhm.
when they were working with UFO Research New South Wales. That book is a very valuable book, and not as well known as it should be, and also goes into the relationship that these objects had with the water catchment areas, because, you know, in Australia, large continent, most of the population is in coastal
Right on the
areas.
coast. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we all live on the coast.
So I'm always amazed that, you know, if you go into an area where people are talking about an abundance of sightings, you will always find that relationship with water here.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, I think the other thing is that we've had a few moments in the media over the years that have dealt with the subject in a very unskeptical way.
Mhm.
And one of those occurred in the 90s.
Yes, early in the 90s. It was a great show, actually.
It was a program called The Extraordinary.
Mhm.
And, you know, I believe Peter Corey was documented for that. There were numerous cases documented for that. If you go up online, and I suspect that there are episodes sitting on YouTube.
Yes.
And if they're not, they're probably in the Internet archives. It is well worth having a look at. At that stage, we were in correspondence with a very interesting character in the States called UFO Dave.
Video Dave.
And he was the Internet before the Internet occurred.
Was.
Now, can you explain to people what I mean by that?
You could write. He had a catalog that was just so thick, and everybody would send him anything that was was on television. So people would videotape all these segments, and they would send him. So he was Video Dave's clearinghouse.
That's right.
So everything from everywhere that was ever on television ended up in Video Dave's clearing warehouse. And he would send you out a catalogue, and you could have like 10 seconds of a UFO spot that was on some news channel, who knows where, anywhere in the world, and talking about a certain case, and you could have it. And he would compile these tapes with, 30 seconds from here, 2 minutes from there. And we used to get tapes from him, 3-hour tapes, just chockers, just full to the brim of all these clips and bits and pieces, and you could cobble together your own.
Yes, we actually put together programs.
We did in the early
UFO
90s. We were putting together programs and screening them to people because, pre-internet, we were doing what the internet would have been doing.
Yes.
So good. They were good times.
And they were great times. And at some stage in the future, we'll show you. We still treasure all those tapes from Video Dave. And, the astounding thing is we used to actually swap with him episodes of The Extraordinary, because there were so many topics that were covered in that program
Mhm.
that were not necessarily covered in news reports in the States.
No,
And so
exactly.
he would say to us, I mean, there was an incident there to do with, was it SeaWorld?
I don't remember, no.
About what was happening with the training of the killer whales, and that was like completely banned from airing in the States, but
Right,
it was
right. Yeah,
broadcast here.
yeah, yeah.
So that was
Oh,
a
right,
great
yes.
relationship we had that was very analog,
Mm.
but in a way was very precognitive of what
What
was
was
going
to
to
come?
start to occur with the internet.
YouTube.
Yes. And it's amazing how historically, when we go back,
Mm.
that today it seems like we're uncovering all this stuff that was certainly there decades
Oh,
ago
yes, it
at the
was.
birth of the modern research into anomalies, especially ufology. Maybe if we pop this interesting book up, it will show you Preston Dennett's book on schoolyard UFO encounters. And I think there's 100 cases in there. And,
School.
I had that incident as a child, one of the biggest eyewitness cases in the world in that regard is Westall 66. And here we go, this book,
Zimbabwe.
which is, oh, yes.
Zimbabwe's a
Ruwe,
huge
yes.
one, yeah.
And I think there's a brand new documentary out on that at the moment. I know that Professor John Mack from Harvard went over there and started a documentary, which you can see fragments of on YouTube. But there's a very interesting thing to do with the relationship of children and adolescents to anomalous sightings, and primarily ufology.
Yeah.
And that children seem to have less of a...
Well, they're more open to things. I know they know that it's weird and it's not normal, but they're still not so jaded and don't understand that this can't be happening. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so they can go through an experience like that without being so post-traumatically stress disordered, like older people who all their lives have been told this is not real, this is a construct, people are hallucinating, this can't possibly happen. And so when it does, it shakes people's whole worldview to their core. And that's when they're not able to deal with any of it, because their mind is saying, you're going crazy, this is not happening, it's not possible. But with children, they're not so conditioned yet to be so closed to anything that doesn't fit within their worldview.
In that Zimbabwe case, which I think involved at least 60 children from the school, they not only witnessed the objects landing and hovering around, but they witnessed beings that actually floated out of the craft, and they said they had telepathic communication with them. And again, an extraordinary consistency, and that communication primarily was about the destruction to the planet that was being, part of the product of humanity's place on this planet. So I think there is a really important point there. I mean, we at one stage ran a 24-hour UFO hotline for a number of years. And the numerous phone calls I got from people that had experienced a sighting or a very close sighting 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And when they would actually begin to articulate it to you, and with our background, we were well aware that we were probably hearing the product of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah.
There was still an incredible amount of fear, and it would take them instantly back to an extremely clear memory. Now, you don't get that from a nightmare. You don't get that from something. You only get it from something that's actually stepped into your reality, that's so far removed from your reality that it shatters your concept of reality and stays with you and gives you this traumatized effect. Then I think, again, add that ridicule factor where people can't talk to their partners, they can't talk to their friends about it, and people are so marginalized.
And they become so isolated that it compounds whatever's happening to them.
Yes.
Even more so.
Look, I think one of the great courageous heroes we've got in this 21st century when it comes to anomalies in the Southern Hemisphere is Don Mears.
All right, okay.
And Don Mears has created numerous documentaries independently. There's a picture of the beautiful Don now. And hopefully next week, when we actually get our time down, we'll get a little bit more organised. Don is going to be our guest live.
That'd be great.
And Don is not just a researcher, and he sticks far away from the field and the community. He does things completely off his own back.
He's very independent in that
financed by his wife and himself. And he has come up with three astounding documentaries already. The first one went up onto Netflix. I think I might have the title there somewhere. Okay. Now, I call it Australian Skies, but
Australian Skies it is.
Okay, so there's 1 and 2. There's I think there's a little cover for it there. And so if you're not aware of these films, and Donna's very generous too, these films occasionally pops back and forth up onto YouTube. I think also the streaming service that you don't need to actually pay to go on Tubi TV,
Tuib.
Tubi. Tubi TV.
Oh, BI, sorry.
Yes. You're getting a bit dyslexic on your birthday there, mister. Anyway, oh, yes, that's your stage name. Sorry, I was slang into that. I can't help myself.
No, you can't.
No. Okay. So there's that. He also did a great documentary that I appear in on the Min Min Light. Can you tell people a little bit about what the Min Min Light is? I'll look it up for you.
Okay. Oh, the Min Min Lights?
Yes.
Okay, the Min Min Lights is the term used by our Indigenous people, for the balls of light that are seen outback.
They're like
or
anomalous.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Anomalous. They're
like an earth light, really, aren't they?
They are earth lights, aren't they? Are they ball lightning? Would you say that they're ball lightning?
No, they're not
they're
ball
different.
lightning. Ball lightning is very fast and very quick. And Min Min lights can hang around for hours. And again, people actually get that incredible thing where there's a close telepathic communication with these lights.
Yeah.
They feel
or they know what
personal.
You're going to do.
You know, when I was in the Nullarbor for To Catch a Flying Star, I actually spoke to roo shooters.
Yes.
Now, roo shooters are out there at sunset and they go to bed all night.
They go all night.
Yeah. And so they had many experiences, but extremely contradictory experiences where one night they would stab it and steer it to get to the light, thinking maybe it's a poacher taking part of their catch for the evening, and they would never get any closer.
No,
it would remain at the equidistance, and then the next night the damn thing would dive
chasing them. Yes.
So how extraordinary. So next week, in a week's time, Don Mears, the producer, the director, the researcher behind the first 2 Australian Skies and then the mystery of the Min Min Light will be with us. And he is a fascinating individual that has remained vehemently independent. He's not a wealthy man, but he's financed every documentary himself.
That's why he's not a wealthy man.
A very generous man. Here's an interesting book people should know about. And this is by the late Pinckney, John Pinckney.
Yes. Alien Honeycomb.
Now, that is a fascinating story, and I'm going to go into that in depth, but I'm just putting it up there as a little bit of a teaser, because if you're interested in stories that sort of talk about that special evidence from UFO crashes, this is one of them directly out of Australia, and we should actually review this with Bill Chalker.
Yes.
I'm not sure whatever happened to this story, but I remember John Pinckney going on TV and showing this evidence live, I think on one of the big midday shows in Australia.
So was the honeycomb thing that he had, was it metal? It was a metal?
It was an alloy. It was a metal alloy that sort of was odd in its definition, but I need to go again back over that research. Very fascinating. Australia has always held, great esteem when it comes to mysteries, but look at this. In Search Of, narrated by these astounding Leonard Nimoy. Now, In Search Of was an astounding TV program, and I think, again, we're at that point with media where if there is going to be any breakthroughs in the field, It's actually going to come from the desperation of media
Yes,
to fill
television.
its
Yeah.
endlessly
Well,
infinite
there's
time slots.
so many platforms now, so many streaming services that they need to create so much content that, you know, here we are, all these amazing shows now, finding all this evidence.
Now here it is in the mid
70s.
1970s that they actually did an entire episode on UFOs in Australia,
Mhm.
which covered Frederick
Valentich's
Valentich's case.
Yep.
And one person that's no longer with us anymore, the incredible Bruce Cathy and his harmonic 33 theory. We both met Bruce, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
Early
Now,
in
what
the
was his
piece.
harmonic 33 theory?
That is a very complicated theory that I'm not actually willing to step into in this program,
yeah.
but very fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. We've knocked back to the beautiful Valentich.
Yeah.
Yes, but you know, it says a lot. Now, what I was going to say about that, the notion of television and what's happening with that, is that last year, DNA evidence was kicked up by the Travel Channel when it came to Sasquatch on the Expedition Bigfoot program.
Yes. One of our favourite programs.
And you realise the first time that Jesse Marcel was ever interviewed was in the program In Search Of.
Yes, he was.
And the episode
That's
on
when he came
Roswell.
out.
It was the first time he came out on camera. And, you know, that's where that whole story literally blew up because it had been so suppressed so well that it wasn't until that TV series and that profound interview, which every documentary on Roswell goes back to.
Yeah.
Back then with Jesse Marcel, who was your lead investigator attached to the Roswell Army Airfield in terms of, you know, interesting technology, foreign technology.
Exactly.
And Jesse and his son, both of them stayed really true and consistent to that story. And we've got a great interview we did here in 2019 with Don Schmidt, who's become literally the new Stanton Freeman.
He has, after Stanton passed away.
And what an integrous, beautiful individual Don is. He is literally a detective when it comes to Roswell.
Yes, he
is.
is.
And he's probably done more research than anyone else. He's written 15 books on the subject.
Yeah.
So, you know, we might go to that interview at some stage in the future.
That'd be great.
Yes.
Anyway.
Okay, let's have a look at this intriguing, just little
it's
graphic
coming out
here.
It's from Australia.
Well, fast radio bursts.
That's right.
Well, I mean, we've had a history with the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, which I think is pi times hydrogen squared. Don't quote me on this. Searching for one of the most noiseless frequencies that therefore has to be artificially generated. But I tell you what, Aspasia, that is a needle in a haystack if I've ever come across it. But this has been occurring for quite some time now. I think at least since 2007. First detected at Parkes Radio Telescope here are these incredibly powerful bursts. Now, there is true inconsistency in the scientific data on these bursts. One of the statements, I think, from Wikipedia, of all places, and you should be very careful when sourcing info from Wikipedia, but it says that these bursts are the equivalent to 80 Earth years of energy from the sun,
right,
shot in a millisecond directly at our planet and being picked up. You know, these bursts are starting to repeat extremely rapidly.
Right.
And they were first observed to be coming from far deep space, and now they're getting extremely closer.
Right.
And I think what we need to do is we need to track down one of the world's leading astrophysicists. I'd say the latter-day J.L. and Hynek, if he's willing to go there, Avi Loeb.
All right, yes.
And we need to do a little interview with him and discuss what exactly is a fast radio burst.
Things, yes.
And could you bring the supposition to bear on them that we are dealing with a data dump of incredible amount of information in a very short space of time, or are we dealing with like the death of a neutron star?
So are they being picked up anywhere else?
Yes, they are being picked up across the world, but
Across the world.
primarily
In parks.
in Australia,
Australia,
not just
okay.
parks.
All
In
right,
Western Australia, there
Okay.
is huge, large array antennas
Right.
that literally are kilometres in length,
Mm-hmm.
and they're actually getting repeating signals.
Okay.
And, you know, this is really the next step in terms of SETI.
SETI, right.
And instead of us actually searching for that signal, it looks like they're firing those signals at us.
Okay, all right.
But, you know,
yeah,
we've always been good in terms of the radio telescope.
Yeah.
So, yes. Now, I actually had some material up with one of the best UFO close encounter abductees out of New Zealand. I had her book up, but I don't think we've got it
Was
today.
that Susie Hansen?
Susie Hansen.
Right,
So
okay,
we'll get in touch with Susie at some stage. She wrote the Dual Soul. I think that's what it was called, the Dual Soul Hypothesis or something like that.
Yeah.
Which is about her experiences. She's done a lot of television work. She's gone to the States and lectured.
She's an amazing researcher.
Yes. Yep. So Susie Hansen. Okay. Let's just keep going. You're on Down South Anomalies with Katz and Aspasia on her birthday. And we are so honoured to be on this extraordinary network. We are slowly, let's have a look at this, because, you know, we cannot deny by the end of this program, one of the other areas you and I might have to travel to, Antarctica.
Yes.
But it's going to be difficult. Because you really do need to have some credentials. You know, there's still a treaty removing any sort of habitation of Antarctica.
Yes.
Even though there are numerous military bases down there.
Yeah.
So we actually met Michael, and he toured. Yes, and he can take things right out there, but still, who knows? And there are endless stories.
Yes, there are.
Some of those stories involve pyramids appearing out of the landscape.
Yep.
Some of them involve evidently alien civilizations living underneath that ice.
Okay.
You know, it is a landmass in comparison to the Arctic, which isn't, which is just an ice shell.
Yeah, an ice shell. Yeah.
And recently, scientists down there have actually come across incredible lakes that have been sealed off from the air for literally tens of thousands of years.
Right.
And assuming there can be no life living in there, and have again found thousands of new species of life on basically
microscopic level.
Microscopic level. Okay. So that is really fascinating.
I don't know why we're going out there to investigate things when there's so much that still hasn't been discovered here on this planet.
Yes, I mean, you need to have a word to Elon Musk and Branson and those people. You know, let's. They only ever get into low Earth orbit, don't they? I mean, really, they're not going. But we're digressing.
Nobody's been into outer space since the moon.
Yeah, that's another interesting conundrum.
Yeah, let's
not that we side with William Casing entirely, but I've always found him a fascinating gentleman. He wrote the first book, We Never Went to the Moon. So
it's an interesting read.
It is an interesting read, and it really makes you wonder, doesn't it, all these years later, why we haven't gone back. So one of the things that you can have a look at that'll shed some light on your and my relationship and our other work, and there was scenes shot for this documentary dealing with our anomalous work, because we actually went up to Warragamba Dam near Katoomba.
Yeah.
And Katoomba,
there's been a lot of sightings up there in Katoomba, which are also Yowie country, big time Yowie country. I think in the early 90s or mid 90s, I think Catalyst, the ABC program, did a whole show on
which was their science show.
Their science show on Yowies up in the mountains there.
Okay, so we went up there for this documentary that we both appear in called Love and Anarchy, The Wild, Wild World of Jamie Leonardo. It's not that wild, really, is it?
It's wild enough.
Okay, there's the cover art for that.
Okay.
Yes. And so you will be able to find that on video, won't you?
Yes.
You'll be able to watch that for free.
You can, but there's no mention of any of our anomalous research in that. It's just about our entertainment and all
welfare
the other
background.
And welfare background, all the other things that we do in our life, and there's lots of things that we do.
You know, what was incredible is the director was very open to having that material, but the producers were like, well, it's going to trivialize this person's artistic career.
Really?
When you actually see the artistic career my wife and I have, you realize that nothing
Can trivialize it.
that it
No,
is
it's
already
already done.
trivial.
Yeah.
I
Anyway.
think there's a bit of a screenshot from it there.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
when I was driving Mission Bee, which was a welfare service inspired by the Barry out
Yeah.
of New York.
Yep.
And it was to pick up homeless people and drug affected people. Here's a little picture of you and I in our archives with our 60mm projector, and you have an obsessive compulsive nature in terms of creation, don't
Yes,
you,
I do.
Aspasia?
Yes, I do.
And so you're knitting there.
Yeah, I'm not knitting today because being our first show and having to do it on our own with some guidance in the background there, somebody keeping a close eye over us, Dean. Thank you, Dean Bertram.
We have to really, we should spend at least the next hour just talking and Stoling the Virtues
Absolutely.
of Dr. Dean Bertram,
Yeah.
who has 2 podcasts on this extraordinary network,
Yeah.
and who has been so
An
generous
invaluable source
with
of
his
help.
time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah.
I mean, it's quite amazing, really, isn't it? So Don Mears for next week. We'll get some info up on that.
Yeah.
And you can have a look in the meantime at The Mystery of the Min Min Lights and have a look at Don Mears's 2 documentaries.
That's right.
Don will also give you, if you have difficulty finding them, I'm sure we'll be able to navigate that completely with Don next week.
Yeah.
And look, this is the beginning of an exponential learning curve for both of us.
But we'll get there pretty quickly, and we will definitely next week be more on the ball. I'm getting a bit, it's been trying to get this together. And
you've done an incredible job, because I am a living neo-Luddite. I'm not the uni bomber, but I should go back to working with wood and steel and not even go near an integrated circuit. But we are going to get there, and I thank you very much for your patience and your time.
Well, we're also trying to find a slot for ourselves where we can, so at the moment,
not hijack anyone else's time on the Untold Radio Network.
No, of course not. But so if we move it around a little bit, maybe one more time, just to see what fits best for our people, so they can be able to come and do it live stream, because we would be doing it in the day, and they might be working. So we're just trying to find our way, maybe 1 or 2 more. And then once we're slotted in at the time, that's the time.
And look, we were big fans, and we still own, and we literally destroyed them, those first 3 seasons of MonsterQuest. And we were so obsessed and so honoured, and that opportunity wouldn't have come to us again if it wasn't for Dr. Dean Bertram, who we've had a relationship in Australia, but decided to leave the fair shores of this penal colony and move to Wisconsin. And we love him deeply, and we really appreciate this opportunity. We also have an incredible background in the arts, and we were actually going to go a little left of centre too. And we will be talking to scientists, researchers, investigators, but we're also going to be talking to musicians and artists who
have
always
had experiences.
Yeah, extremely open mind when it comes to the world of anomalies. And we will be trying to circumnavigate the Earth from that point of the equator over, the next period of this astounding podcast. So welcome. Thank you for your patience and time. Very exciting to see South America on board with us today as we went live streaming, and everyone else. Jamie Leonardo, J. Katz, my beautiful wife, Aspasia. Happy birthday to you. Darling. And we'll catch up with you next week with the astounding producer, director, and investigator, Don Mears.
Okay, and here we go.
Here we do
All right,
go.
This is going to...
It's like cycling backwards here, folks.
Yeah, all right. We'll see you next week. Thank you so much for joining us.
Take care.